Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on trade talk developments and insults lobbed against Canada. But first, the direction of healthcare.
We just want to put the power in the hands of the patient so that they can get those peace of mind tests and hopefully get the all clear. But if they do end up getting something diagnosed, we want them to be reimbursed so that they can get directly into treatment.
Albertans can now pay out of pocket or through private insurance for preventative diagnostic testing and do so without a doctor's referral. Part of evolving health system changes that include legislation allowing doctors to work in both the public system and private for-profit clinics. Joining us now to discuss this and more, Edmonton Strathcona MP Heather McPherson. Ms. McPherson, good to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
Nice to have you back in studio. Healthcare. You've taken to social media calling the actions of the Smith government the biggest attack on public health care in Canadian history.
Yeah.
What makes it so?
Listen, I think we all know Canadians cherish our healthcare system, our public healthcare system, and the whole point of our healthcare system is that it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter where you live in this country, you should be able to access good, high-quality healthcare. That's something that Canadians believe in. That's something that we cherish. It's part of our identity. And what Danielle Smith is doing with Bill 11 is making it so that if you have more money, you can jump the queue. If you have the ability to pay, you can get yourself ahead of others that are waiting in line. And so what it does is it makes a two-tiered American-style healthcare system. And that's against the law. I mean, that's against the Canada Health Act.
Okay, we'll come to the Canada Health Act in just a sec. But is this not the Premier answering to what some Albertans are asking for? They want to avoid the long waits.
Listen, I understand. You know, I have friends who have needed hip replacements or who have cancer treatments. I'm a cancer survivor myself. And I understand why people want to be able to access that health care. So you need to fix the healthcare system. You don't make a two-tiered system because we have limited doctors, we have limited nurses, we have limited, machines that can do the diagnostic tests. So if you are jumping the queue, if you are going through the private systems, that means you're taking a doctor off the public queue. You're taking a machine off the public queue. You're making it harder for people to be able to access that health care. So it becomes, if you can pay, you can get health care. If you can't pay, you wait. So the single mom working at Tim Hortons or, the senior in our community that desperately needs to be able to get access to health care can't access it. It becomes harder and harder to do that.
You're a long-serving member of Parliament. You're well tapped into political dynamics in our province. So how do you read the Premier's motivations for taking healthcare in the direction that she appears to be taking it?
Listen, Michael, there's a lot of money to be made in healthcare. And I have no doubt in my mind that Danielle Smith is not worried about the health care of Albertans. Danielle Smith knows that there is money to be made by her friends, and I have no doubt that that is driving the decisions that she is making to purposely destroy the public healthcare system so that folks can make a ton of money on healthcare insurance and healthcare provisions.
Okay, so if this is as big of an attack on public healthcare as you're suggesting, why aren't alarm bells ringing at the federal level where the Canada Health Act is concerned?
Well, I would certainly like to ask Mr. Carney that. I have certainly brought that up in the House of Commons multiple times. You know, what Bill 11 does, what this bill does that allows for this two-tiered American-style health care is against the law. And that's the federal jurisdiction. So the Canada Health Act is a federal law. The Prime Minister has an obligation to protect it. Canadians expect our Prime Minister to protect the law. If he doesn't do that...
Why wouldn't he then?
I don't know if he thinks appeasing Danielle Smith at this moment is going to stop the separatist sentiment. I honestly believe that it won't help at all. In fact, the best way that we show how Alberta works well in Canada is by making sure those institutions that support Canadians, including Albertans, are strong, like our healthcare system, like our pension plan. If this is an appeasement plan, I don't think it'll work. The bigger worry for me is, does Mark Carney think he can use healthcare as a bargaining chip on the CUSMA negotiations? Are we at risk of having American healthcare providers and American healthcare insurance companies entering our healthcare system. Because if that happens, it's pretty much over. You know, then we are an American system. And I don't think any Canadians, whether they vote New Democrat or Conservative, want a system like the Americans have.
What would warrant, though, putting healthcare into that mindset or that framing around negotiations on CUSMA? Why would healthcare fit into that?
If there is a possibility of arranging a deal with, we don't know. I mean, we don't know, Michael, to be honest. But if we're looking at all of the tariffs that are in place, if we're looking at things that we are willing to horse trade, I certainly hope healthcare is not on there. But we have seen the Prime Minister appease Donald Trump on other things. You know, we've seen the digital sales tax. We've seen the Gordie Howe International Bridge Agreement. You know, there have been circumstances where the Prime Minister has not shown himself to be elbows up. And I would urge the Prime Minister and his Health Minister to be very, very cautious with healthcare. I think this is something that, regardless of where you live in this country, having a strong, you know, public, universal healthcare system is probably one of the things that most Canadians cherish most.
If you're in government, be that federal or provincial, you've been elected to government. Is that not part of your mandate to maintain public health care?
Yeah.
Is that not?
Again, I just have to go back. It's actually the law. The Canada Health Act is a federal law. It is the obligation, it is the responsibility of the Prime Minister and his government. It is a federal jurisdiction. His obligation is to protect federal laws.
What's to be made of this all evolving at a time when Albertans are preparing to vote in a referendum that includes a question on separation? You brought up appeasement and that separation element before, but what do you make of how all of those paths maybe cross?
Well, certainly I think what we're seeing is a purposeful destruction of our public health care system. You know, we know that this current Alberta government does not believe in the public system. They have undermined it at every step. But it's one more thing. You know, during the last election, the last provincial election, Danielle Smith said she would keep her hands off our health care system. You know, she has no mandate for this referendum. She has no mandate from the people of Alberta to hold this referendum on the 9 questions, of which I certainly hope every single Albertan says no, or the question on separation. She has no mandate to hurt our healthcare system. And all of these things are being done because Danielle Smith is using an ideology that is not what I believe is in line with most Albertans.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there for time. Appreciate that you've come in to chat today.
Thanks for having me in to talk about this.
From a federal politician weighing in on Alberta's health direction to poll results on anti-coal positioning and what Donald Trump thinks of Canadians as trade talks resume. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Kathy Kerr, freelance writer and editor, longtime Alberta print journalist, and Chaldine Smenza, newly retired political science faculty member with MacEwan University. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with our conversation off the top with Edmonton MP Heather McPherson, who has called the Smith government actions and legislation the biggest attack on public health care in Canadian history. Kathy, what kind of light do you see Heather McPherson shining on healthcare dynamics direction in our province? And where do you see it landing on the radar of Albertans?
I think it's interesting because she is an MP, not an MLA, and so she is bringing a federal perspective to it that we're not hearing nearly as much. I mean, you hear tons of outrage from the NDP provincially on the whole question of private health care and who gets the contracts for that private health care. But actually coming at it from that other angle, from the angle of how Canada is responsible for the health care of the people as a whole, of all Canadians, not just Albertans, it does sort of raise up the level a little bit in terms of this should be not just a provincial debate, but a national debate.
So, Chaldine, if it's as worrisome as Heather McPherson claims, why wouldn't there be Canada Health Act alarm bells ringing?
Well, Michael, I think the federal government has been negligent in terms of its defense of the Canada Health Act. We've seen provinces take all kinds of end run around the CHA. I think part of it goes back to the Supreme Court ruling of 2005, the Shaoli decision, and which actually has paved the way in the Quebec context for cataract and hip replacement, knee and hip replacement, cataract, and all these surgeries to be done using private mechanisms. So in Canada, we have over 1.4 million Canadians spend over 20 weeks plus waiting to get into surgery. That is unacceptable, and the federal government has to take leadership and make sure whatever mechanisms are needed, whether it's resources, defending the Canada Health Act. But I think that lack of action opens the way for provinces to take initiative to try to innovate and find solutions to the problem.
Because, Kathy, how likely is it, though, that the federal government would remain hands-off, especially where Alberta is concerned and any direction that's taking with healthcare?
Well, so far, they've certainly been able to do pretty well anything they want to. And we do know that there's some other situations. There's a certain creep that's been happening, not just in Alberta. BC has several situations that also lean into the private sector for healthcare delivery. And I think it's gradually been happening over the last 2 decades. I think that in Alberta, it's accelerating. I think there's so much on the federal plate right now. This is not a battle they want to pick. Now, the question becomes, once we've got a trade deal, once some of that ramps down, once Mr. Trump is out of the U.S. government, is Ottawa ever going to take a look and say, okay, we need maybe a cross-country look at this whole thing. Maybe we need a whole federal inquiry on exactly what does the Canada Health Act allow and not allow, because it does seem to be a real moving target, and they certainly are dodging that ball right now.
All right. For us, up next, new polling that suggests Albertans would have voted to ban neo coal mining. Had a question, made it onto the referendum ballot.
It's quite interesting. This is one that very likely would pass. It certainly points to preference among Albertans for greater restrictions, if not prohibition, on coal mining operations in the Eastern Slopes.
The online survey by ThinkHQ found 52% of respondents would support the ban, 25% opposed, 23% unsure. Support among decided voters rose to 68%. The group, Water Not Coal, submitted its completed petition, hoping their question would be part of the October referendum. However, Elections Alberta ruled recently it did not meet the required number of valid signatures. Chaldeans, what kind of weight do you see these poll results carrying, given what's happened with Corblund's Coal Not Water petition?
Well, Michael, I take the polls with a bit of grain of salt. Polls are important, but I think that what is happening with this particular petition, and also with the separatism issue and the petitions about recall, really the evidence is clear. The provincial government has to revisit these direct democracy mechanisms that are grafted on top of our parliamentary system. It's really not working as they intended. Governments contest general elections asking for a mandate from the electorate. And when we allow these kind of direct democracy mechanisms, they're susceptible to be used by special interest. And they end up in the courts, and they really are causing chaos and confusion. So I think that obviously Mr. Lund is unhappy, and I think he's a bit overboard in calling the Elections Alberta crooked. I think, sure, the methodology used by Elections Alberta is a bit suspect, but I think that is really also maybe a situation of where they were not diligent enough in looking at the people that were signing these things. And maybe that is why they are caught in this particular bind.
Well, Kathy Corblund he's filed for a judicial review, arguing the decision by Elections Alberta was unreasonable, procedurally unfair, inconsistent with legislation. How do you weigh the status of his petition against the government's handling of a question on the referendum for separatists?
Yeah, I mean, this is points to just what Chaldine said. There's a huge amount of inconsistency in how the province is dealing with these referendum questions. And also, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of chaos in how they drafted the act in the first place. It's had to be redrafted twice. It's a mess. They've made a tremendous mess out of this. And you have to have a little bit of sympathy for Corblund here, because he was playing under these insane rules they came up with, and now the actual detail and the way that they actually do these kinds of validations has turned out to be a bit wonky, and so now we're in the courts, which is, once again, is that where we want to be led from? Do we want to be led from the courts? I mean, this is the way they set it up. He's playing under the rules. So it's quite chaotic, and I think the provincial government really has started to realize that. In the case of Indigenous consultation, for instance, the Premier finally put up her hands and said, well, we might just as well not have one of these, direct democracy rules. Yeah, exactly. Or at least come up with some solution with way better guardrails than they have now.
All right. Time for us to take a bit of a break. When we come back, the resumption of trade talks and an insult from south of the border. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. Canadian and American trade officials began meeting again in Washington today, with negotiations reportedly intensifying ahead of more tariffs threatened by Donald Trump set to go into effect later this month. And here's what the U.S. president had to say about our country during a campaign-style speech in Las Vegas.
We've been screwed by tariffs used against us for years by China, by Japan, by South Korea, by Germany, by everybody, by Canada. Canada's nasty. They are. They're nasty. People think Canada, they're nasty. I love the people, but they're nasty. Nasty leadership.
The new 50% tariffs would apply to a wide range of Canadian imports starting August 19th. And unlike previous measures, there would be no exemptions for goods covered by CUSMA. The Prime Minister says Canada's tone toward the U.S. is already quite firm, insists negotiations remain constructive. So, Kathy, let's start on the Canada is nasty comments, which came less than 24 hours before the trade reps were to pick up their discussions. All part of the Trump playbook? Looking to inject some chaos into the conversation, knock Canadians off balance?
I think totally, and we shouldn't be knocked off balance in any way. If you listen to the clip and you listen to the reaction, they're not all cheering for him talking about how nasty we are. They're laughing because it's absurd. I mean, it is actually a little comedy routine here he's doing to lighten the mood, because everybody knows we're not nasty, we're really nice. So it just is kind of a it's noise in the background here, and it doesn't really set a tone any longer, because it's sort of his drumbeat. It's just his constant, here's what I have to say, and we all know it's a little bit silly, but I'm going to keep talking about it. So I think essentially it doesn't mean anything. It got a laugh. I think that's what was really going on, and I think the Prime Minister's reaction was, you can pick any adjective you want. We're going into this seriously. So I think it's just another one of those sort of indications that we're in negotiations, and at least one member is going to say whatever he pleases about it just to get a reaction.
Yeah, and Chaldine, to pick up on what Kathy's saying there, the Prime Minister was asked today about the nasty comments. That happened at a news conference in Quebec this morning, and the response was that his government is standing up for Canadian workers, for Canadian businesses. What is to be made of that neutral response?
Well, I think that Mr. Carney really benefits politically from being this antagonist to Mr. Trump. I mean, this is really the reason why he won that election. this elbows up stance. And but what we're seeing now is a real sharp deterioration in the relationship, personal relationship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Carney. This escalation of insults, mockery, is not very good in terms of the personal dynamics between the two. However, having said that, the trade negotiations are continuing. I think Mr. Trump, with his introduction of the 50% tariff, is basically using that as leverage to force Canada to make concessions. And I think Mr. Carney has to be very careful because I think Canadians are watching carefully. And if he makes too many concessions, I think that could cost him politically. But look, Mr. Trump is real business in trying to extract concessions from Canada, and we'll have to really stand firm as the negotiations continue.
Kathy, there is messaging from the PM that Canada is ready to get tougher if a deal isn't reached before August 19th, when those 50% tariffs are to come into effect. Is there anything to be read into that particular tone? Elbows up?
Again, it's elbows up. And that's a question, because what he says and what he's been doing are somewhat at odds. He has given some concessions here and there. And I think every time he does that, he damages his political brand a bit, because if you've already said elbows up and then you say, oh, well, maybe not on this particular issue, and we're going to, we're willing to take a look at, things about, various telecommunications issues and things like that. I think I think he's got to follow through if he's going to do that. They are going into a very sort of extremely tough period, because we know Canada wants to deal off the top with the really big issues, and they are the tough issues. The big tough issues are steel and aluminum and autos. We know the States does not want to deal with those first. They want to pick away, getting concession after concession after concession before getting to the really substantial issues regarding metals and the auto pact. And so I think this is the toughest period of the negotiations. What happens in the next month? I know we think of August 16th as the big deadline, because that's when those supposed tariffs are coming on. But we know that Trump does sometimes extend if talks are going okay. I think in the next month may tell a tale on how that trade discussion is going to shape up, and that's what makes it tough.
And Chaldeans, the likelihood of those 50% tariffs actually hitting, they will be implemented because there is no deal on the table?
Michael, I think experts are saying that that 50% tariff is potentially illegal. This is tariffs brought by the president under the 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and that policy requires an investigation, a fact-finding investigation by the International Trade Commission. That hasn't been done. What Mr. Trump has done is use executive order and simply said that there's going to be 50% tariff. He hasn't demonstrated that Canada is discriminating. So I think that there's a question mark, and I see this as really a leverage play by Mr. Trump to get Canada to sign up to a deal. And I think Mr. Carney has to be very cautious as we approach August 19th. And Michael, moreover, I think Mr. Greer, the U.S. trade representative, is saying that he's going to negotiate an interim arrangement.
Right.
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, it could stretch it out
Canada
for
has
a
to be
long
very
time.
cautious.
Okay, we're out of time. We have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is our program for tonight. Remember, you can always have a say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, growing debate over an Edmonton Police Service campaign on hate reporting and the Alberta government's reaction. We will hear from hate crime researcher Irfan Chowdhury on Friday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.